They thought it would be funny to turn one woman's loneliness into the night's punchline. Jenna Harper, 26, tugs her cardigan sleeves like soft armor and steps off the late bus onto rain-dark cobblestones. Rosewood Bistro glows honey-warm. Her gut says, don't. Her phone buzzes. Clara, he's already there. Please, Jen. If you hate it, I'll be around the corner. Clara fixes things with tape and coffee. Jenna trusts her, even tonight. But Vanessa? Different a story. She doesn't set people up. She sets them off. A blind date here isn't kindness. It's a stage. Jenna grips the brass handle, feeling an ache she can't name. 2 years back, love was a bright room. Then the lights cut out. Her ex emptied her savings, money for mom's treatment, and left with Jenna's best friend. Since then, life has been lists, bills, bus times, prescriptions. Love went under later. Later never came. She steps into low light and sees the corner table. The man stands, dark button down, sleeves rolled, hair a little mussed, eyes steady, kind, tired at the edges, like someone who waits up for a child. Next to him in a booster seat, a little girl with a stuffed bunny whose ear won't behave. Brown curls, shoes that blink with every kick. A purple crayon behind one ear. She grins at Jenna like this is the best part of the night. The sound arrives first. Giggles, sharp as ice chips. 2 tables over, Vanessa and her glittering committee pretend not to stare. Phones out, cameras half raised. He brought his kid, someone stage whispers. I can't, another snort. Hope she brought coupons. Heat climbs Jenna's throat. She pictures the bus doors hissing, the relief of not being brave. The man clears his throat, gentle, not performative. He pulls out the chair. Hi, you must be Jenna. I'm Brian. This is Sophie. The little girl gives a queenly wave with the bunny's paw. Jenna's fingers buzz like she's holding a live wire. She can feel Vanessa's gaze on her back, like a glass wobbling at a table's edge, almost inviting the fall. It would be easy to feed them the ending they came for. Girl flees, laughter follows, clip posted, comments bloom like mold. But Sophie's shoe light blinks twice, and that tiny sparkle cuts through the noise. The kid is 4, maybe. None of this is her fault. Jenna inhales. The air tastes like lemon butter and panic. She studies Brian's face. There's a small scar near his temple, the kind you get when life throws something hard and you don't duck. Kind eyes. A quiet, apologetic smile that doesn't beg or sell, just waits. A memory, the night nurse teaching her to breathe. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 6. Jenna does it now. Her heartbeat cooperates. Vanessa taps her phone, flashless, but Jenna knows the internet loves a spectacle. If she walks, they win. If she sits, they still might. But at least she chooses. Don't, the old hurt whispers. Do. Something newer answers. Jenna steps closer. The chair scrapes. She isn't seated yet. But everything in her life, the lists, the late buses, the careful smallness, leans toward the moment like a tide. Brian's voice softens. Babysitter bailed. I almost canceled. He lifts one shoulder, half sheepish. Didn't want to miss meeting you. It's not slick. It's not a line. It sounds small and true. Sophie nods like a tiny witness. Jenna notices the bunny's stitched ear, clumsy but careful, like someone learned to mend because someone small needed them to. If she sits, it isn't just dinner. It's a pivot with gravity. She curls her fingers around the chair. The wood is warm. For once, she wants a story not written by the cruelest person in the room. She closes her eyes, counts 1, 2, 3, then opens them to the only 2 faces that aren't laughing. And she moves. Does she plant both feet and sit, or turn on her heel and leave them staring at an empty chair? Every choice we make carries the echo of everything that broke us before. Before Jenna, a young black African woman, can decide whether to sit at that table, the past pulls her back like a hand on her shoulder. The laughter in Rosewood melts into another sound. Voices raised, but not in humor. 2 years earlier, she's in a tiny apartment kitchen, steam rising from a chip kettle. Her mother, an older black African woman, coughing softly from the couch. Jenna's boyfriend, Matt, a young black African man, is leaning against the counter, promising a future bright enough to blind. It's a startup, Jen. We'll triple your savings in 6 months. You'll be free of double shifts. Your mom will get the best care. And Jenna, a young black African woman, believed him. Believed with her whole chest, because back then she still thought love meant loyalty. She drained the account she'd been building since her first job at 16. Every paycheck, a slice tucked away for her mother's treatment. Gone in one wire transfer, gone with Matt's, a young black African man, easy grin. The night she found out, 3 weeks later, she walked into an empty apartment. Closet bare, drawers hollow. A note taped to the fridge. "I'm sorry, but this is my shot. You'll be okay. You're stronger than you think." That was all. No goodbye, no apology that mattered. He'd run off with her supposed best friend, the one who'd sat by her hospital bed and held her hand while her mother, an older black African woman, dozed. Jenna, a young black African woman, remembers the cold of the tile as she slid down against the fridge, note crumpled in her fist. Her mother, already fragile, never knew the truth. Jenna, a young black African woman, made sure of that. She just said the money was tied up, some paperwork delay. Meanwhile, she juggled 2 jobs and debt collectors' calls. Since then, she built walls. Thin ones maybe, but layered. Humor at work, kept to herself. Small talk, measured. Men, not even a consideration. Her world shrank into 3 safe zones. Her mother's, an older black African woman, hospital room. The quiet order of spreadsheets and the paperback novels she devoured to feel anything remotely like hope. That's why Vanessa's, a black African woman, blind date stung long before Jenna, a young black African woman, even walked through Rosewood's doors. Not just because it was cruel, but because it was predictable. In every office, there's always one person who can smell a wound, and Vanessa, a black African woman, was a bloodhound. She didn't know Jenna's whole story, but she knew enough. Quiet, withdrawn, easy target. Perfect candidate for a joke that could trend in a group chat by morning. And yet, here Jenna, a young black African woman, was. The very act of showing up felt like rebellion. She wasn't laughing, but she wasn't hiding either. The present bleeds back in, the scent of garlic butter, the glow of candles. The small sound of a little girl, a young black African girl, Sophie, humming to herself. Sophie is coloring on a napkin now, tongue caught between her teeth in focus. Brian, a black African man, sits steady, waiting. No pressure in his posture, just patience. Jenna's, a young black African woman, pulse flickers with the old warning, don't trust, don't risk, don't fall again. But another voice, quieter, almost foreign, whispers, what if this is different? Her eyes dart sideways. Vanessa's, a black African woman, group lifts their glasses in a silent toast, smirks curling like smoke. They're ready for the show, ready for Jenna, a young black African woman, to deliver humiliation on cue. But Jenna, a young black African woman, remembers another scene. Her mother's, an older black African woman, fragile smile. A promise whispered but never believed. Until maybe, just maybe, tonight. The chair waits. Brian's, a black African man, eyes meet hers, kind but steady, not probing. Sophie, a young black African girl, looks up, crayon streaked across her fingers, and beams like Jenna, a young black African woman, just stepped into her storybook. And Jenna, a young black African woman, thinks, if I walk now, I'll never know. If this was the moment life tried to hand me back a piece of what it stole. She exhales, fingers trembling on the back of the chair. Will she defy the cruel script written for her, or fold into the role they've rehearsed in whispers? Some betrayals are loud, others hide in giggles and side glances, waiting to spring the net. The chair creaks as Jenna lowers herself, every muscle rigid, braced for the laughter to erupt. But it doesn't, at least, not yet. Instead, there's the faint shuffle of shoes beneath the next table, a muffled cough, the glow of a phone screen lighting Vanessa's sharp grin. This night wasn't an accident. It was choreography. Hours earlier, in the break room that always smelled faintly of burnt coffee, Vanessa had staged the setup. She leaned against the counter like a queen surveying pawns. He's into quiet girls, she'd said, pitching her voice just loud enough. Begged me for her number. Swore he likes the shy type, thought it was cute. The others giggled, eyes darting toward Jenna's cubicle. One whispered, can you imagine? Her on a date? Another snorted into her paper cup. It was cruel, but cruelty wrapped in sugar passes in offices every day. Clara had known something was wrong. She'd cornered Jenna that afternoon, pale and shaking. Look, they're making a game of it, she confessed. They booked the table. They're planning to show up. I tried to stop it, but Vanessa, she spun it so it looked like I set you up. I'm sorry, Jen. I didn't mean for it to get this far. Jenna had heard the words like stones dropping into water. Game, planning, show up. Her throat closed. And yet, pride had flared. If they think I'll be too humiliated to show, they're wrong. So she agreed, not because she wanted the date, but because she refused to give Vanessa the ending she craved. Now here she sits, the echoes of that choice ringing in her ears. Vanessa and her circle pretend to scroll their phones, but every flicker of the screen is another camera poised to capture the awkward girl moment. Brian breaks the silence gently. Sophie, say hello. The little girl waves, her bunny's ear drooping. Hi, want to see my drawing? She holds up a crayon princess with stick figure arms. Jenna can't help the small smile tugging at her mouth. It's fragile, but it's real. And that ironically rattles Vanessa more than if Jenna had bolted. From 2 tables away, a hissed whisper. She's actually sitting down. What is she thinking? Laughter bubbles quickly smothered. The trap was supposed to be simple. Girl humiliated, story shared, Monday morning entertainment secured. But Jenna hasn't collapsed, not yet. And that uncertainty, that gap between expectation and reality, unsettles the audience. Still, the danger is far from over. Every second Jenna remains, the snickers grow sharper, angrier, because the joke isn't landing the way it was rehearsed. Jenna feels the weight of eyes, the sting of whispered commentary. Her palms dampen against her skirt. She wants to vanish, dissolve into the flicker of candlelight. But Sophie's tiny hand pushes a napkin toward her. This is you, the girl announces, pointing at the princess. You look like her. For the first time in years, Jenna doesn't feel like the punchline. She feels seen. But across the room, Vanessa narrows her eyes. And in that moment, Jenna realizes the trap hasn't failed. It's only shifting. They'll push harder, sharper, until they get the spectacle they came for. The question is, how much fight does Jenna have left? When the first taunt finally lands, will Jenna withstand it? Or will the walls she's built come crashing down? Sometimes the first look isn't fireworks. It's a mirror that shows you who you've been and who you might still become. Jenna hadn't expected much. Maybe a stranger with nervous hands. Maybe some smug guy who'd lean back in his chair like she was a prize he didn't want. But Brian, he stood the moment she appeared, not flustered, not arrogant, just present. A quiet strength in the way he pushed Sophie's chair closer to the table, then offered Jenna the seat across from him. And Sophie, little Sophie, her whole face lit up, curls bouncing, bunny tucked under her arm like a trusted guard. She smiled so wide that Jenna's chest cracked a little, a sliver of warmth sliding through the anxiety. But behind that warmth came the static. Vanessa's laugh, sharp enough to slice. Phones angled just so, pretending to scroll, waiting for the scene to collapse. Jenna felt the eyes crawling across her back, writing captions before the moment was even finished. Brian noticed. He had to. His gaze flickered toward the snickering table, then back to Jenna, steady as stone. You don't have to stay, his eyes seemed to say. But if you do, I'll make sure you're not alone. Jenna shifted, one hand brushing the chair, the other gripping her bag strap tight. She should go. The whole night was designed for her to go. But Sophie's tiny fingers were busy drawing another princess, this time with a crown bigger than her head. The little girl leaned across the table and whispered, "This one's you too." Something inside Jenna, something she thought had withered long ago, stirred. Not hope, not yet, but defiance. If she walked out now, Vanessa would win. If she sat down, maybe, just maybe, she could rewrite the script. Brian's voice finally cut through the noise, low and careful. I'm Brian, and this is Sophie. She insisted on bringing her favorite bunny in case you didn't like us right away. He smiled, soft and a little self-deprecating. And for the first time that evening, Jenna laughed. Not loud, not free, but real. The laugh caught Vanessa's attention. A hiss of irritation slipped from her lips. This wasn't the humiliation she'd ordered. Brian leaned in just slightly, enough for Jenna to catch the faint scent of soap and coffee. Look, I know this isn't what you expected. Honestly, it's not what I expected either. But I'm glad you came. Jenna blinked, heat rising to her face. When was the last time someone said they were glad she existed without needing something from her? She couldn't remember. The restaurant hummed around them, silverware clinking, soft jazz in the background, couples murmuring over wine. But for Jenna, the noise faded. All that remained was the choice, to claim this moment as hers, or to let Vanessa's cruelty dictate her story. Her hand finally left the strap of her bag. She pulled out the chair. The legs scraped against stone, echoing louder than it should have. Brian's eyes warmed, Sophie clapped, and for just a second, Jenna thought maybe she'd made the right call. But Vanessa wasn't done. She leaned toward her crew, a whisper sharp enough to carry, "Oh my God, she actually sat. This is going to be epic." Jenna's breath hitched, her fingers curling against her lap. She had crossed the threshold, but the storm was only beginning. When Vanessa makes her move to escalate, will Brian stand between them, or will Jenna be forced to fight back on her own? Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is nothing more than stay in your seat. The chair groaned softly under Jenna's weight. The silence fell over the other table. Vanessa's smirk froze for a half second, like she hadn't expected Jenna to actually sit. One of her sidekicks raised a phone higher, angling for the perfect shot, then lowered it again when nothing embarrassing happened. Brian slid a breadbasket closer. "Sophie's favorite," he murmured. The little girl reached in and offered Jenna a piece like it was a sacred ritual. Jenna's hand trembled as she accepted. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice so thin she barely recognized it. Sophie giggled. "You sound like a princess." Princesses say thank you in stories. That earned another round of muffled laughter from Vanessa's table. Jenna's jaw clenched, her nails biting into her palm under the tablecloth. She could walk. She should walk. But there was something in Brian's steady gaze, something in Sophie's innocent smile that tethered her to the moment. The waiter arrived, notebook poised. Brian ordered with practiced ease. Grilled salmon for himself, pasta for Sophie. Then he turned to Jenna. "Take your time," he said gently, like there was no clock ticking, no eyes burning holes in her back. Jenna scanned the menu she could barely read. The roasted chicken," she finally managed. "Great choice," Brian said, handing the menu back with a smile that made it sound like he meant it. Not forced, not fake, just warm. The waiter left, and for a moment it was almost normal. The clinking of dishes, the warm glow of candles, Sophie humming as she colored. But the storm pressed at the edges, relentless. A whisper cut through. "Can you believe she's actually pretending this is real?" More laughter. Jenna's chest tightened. She wanted to vanish, to melt into the chair. But instead, she lifted the breadstick Sophie had offered and took a bite. Chewy, buttery, ordinary, and yet defiant. She chewed, swallowed, and met Brian's eyes across the table. His smile didn't widen, but it deepened, as if he understood exactly what that bite meant. "I'm still here." Vanessa shifted, irritation flashing. She leaned toward her friends, whispering loud enough. "She thinks sitting down makes her one of us. Just wait." Jenna didn't hear the words clearly, but she felt the venom. The trap wasn't over. It was only evolving. But for the first time, Jenna wasn't just a pawn. She was a player. Sophie set down her crayon and pushed the napkin across the table. "Look," she said proudly, "I drew you again. You have a crown." Jenna's throat tightened, eyes stinging. The drawing was messy, lopsided, a child's idea of royalty. But to Sophie, it was real. To Sophie, Jenna wasn't a joke. She was someone worthy of a crown. And that small, innocent faith, it hit harder than any taunt ever could. But when the first real jab from Vanessa finally lands, sharp, direct, unavoidable, will Jenna's fragile resolve hold or shatter? It isn't always the grand gestures that save you. Sometimes it's the little mercies, stitched together, that keep you from unraveling. The tension sat heavy, like static before a storm, but Brian carried on as though the restaurant belonged to only the three of them. He tore a piece of bread for Sophie, placed it on her plate, and nudged her juice box closer so she wouldn't spill. The care was so natural, so unforced, that Jenna found herself watching him more than she meant to. Sophie colored with fierce concentration, tongue poking from the corner of her mouth. She glanced up at Jenna suddenly. Do you like dinosaurs? The question startled Jenna. She blinked, then gave a small laugh. Sure. Why? Sophie held up another drawing, a princess riding a triceratops, crown askew, smiling like she owned the world. Because you're not just a princess. You can fight dragons too. The words landed deeper than they should have. Jenna had been told many things, too quiet, too soft, too naive. Never that she could fight dragons. Her eyes pricked, and she quickly looked away, pretending to study the flicker of candlelight. Brian leaned in, voice low and warm. She loves to draw. Princesses, dinosaurs, sometimes both. She thinks the two go hand in hand. That's actually kind of brilliant, Jenna said, and her voice cracked on the edge of a laugh. Across the room, Vanessa rolled her eyes dramatically, but Jenna barely noticed. For a fleeting moment, she wasn't the target of a cruel setup. She was just a woman sharing breadsticks with a kind-eyed man and his imaginative daughter. Brian seemed to sense the shift. I'm sorry if this feels awkward, he said, adjusting Sophie's napkin bib. My babysitter canceled. I almost didn't come, but I didn't want to miss the chance to meet you. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't slick. It was simple and sincere. And Jenna, so used to people lying with ease, couldn't help but believe him. She nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of Sophie's drawing. I'm glad you didn't cancel, she admitted, though her voice was barely above a whisper. For the first time that night, the heat in her chest wasn't humiliation. It was something else, something gentler. Vanessa's table stirred, restless. The joke wasn't landing the way they'd planned. One of them muttered, she's actually buying it. Another smirked, but there was frustration behind it. Jenna caught the whisper, her stomach lurching. The old instinct to shut down, to retreat, flared hot. But then Sophie reached across the table, offering Jenna a crayon with the kind of solemnity only children manage. Here, she said, so you can draw too. Jenna took it, hand trembling. A purple crayon, the color of crowns, of bruises, of nights spent trying to be brave. She set the tip against the napkin, sketching a wobbly heart, and slid it back. Sophie squealed in delight, hugging the napkin like treasure. Brian smiled at the exchange, eyes warm. See, you're already in her world. And Jenna realized so softly it almost hurt that maybe she wanted to be. But Vanessa isn't done watching. Her table leans closer, planning their first direct strike. When it comes, will Jenna's fragile new warmth survive the blow? Bullies don't fade when you ignore them. Sometimes they double down, hungry for a scene. Jenna felt it, the hush, the sharpened smiles. Vanessa's chair scraped back, a deliberate squeal. Attention, please. Brian felt it too. His hand rested on Sophie's shoulder. The child's humming dipped. A black African woman from Vanessa's table, lipstick bright, phone in hand, sauntered over, heels clicking like tiny gavels. She stopped by Jenna's chair and tilted her head with fake sweetness. Oh, hey, she said, voice pitched to Carrie. Didn't know you were into this kind of thing. Jenna, a black African woman, blinked. Into what? The black African woman's gaze slid to Sophie, a black African child, then back with a smirk. Blind dates with single dates, kinda perfect for you, right? Low stakes, easy win. A tiny laugh. Brave, though, showing up. 2 tables over, Vanessa, a black African woman, hid a grin. A friend lifted a phone. Heat climbed Jenna's neck. Her fingers crinkled the napkin Sophie had drawn on. She pictured the safer ending. Excuse yourself, vanish. Brian, a black African man, rose. Not loud, just steady. One hand stayed on Sophie's shoulder. I'm proud to be a father, Brian, a black African man said, voice low but clear. And I know how to treat the woman across from me better than anyone at your table has tonight. No puffed chest, no glare, just truth. The black African woman's smirk wobbled. Relax, it was a joke. Then you aimed your joke at a child, Brian, a black African man replied. Pick a different target. A black African couple went still. The hostess glanced over. Sophie, a black African child, whispered to Jenna, Are you okay? Yeah, kiddo, Jenna, a black African woman said, and meant it. The black African woman scoffed and retreated. Vanessa, a black African woman, leaned in, hissed something, eyes narrowing. The phone dipped, then rose. The hunt wasn't over, it had just failed the first pass. Brian, a black African man, sat. "I'm sorry," he said, "not for himself, for the world. You shouldn't have to deal with that." "I've dealt with worse," Jenna, a black African woman, said bare. Sophie, a black African child, pushed the napkin back. "You can keep it," she declared. "Protection." Jenna, a black African woman, swallowed a laugh that was also a sob. "Thank you." A black African waiter arrived with 2 complimentary shots. "From your fans," he winced. Brian's no was gentle. "Please take them back." He slid a tip into the server's palm. "They won't quit," Jenna, a black African woman, murmured. "They'll get bored," Brian, a black African man, said, "unless they find a new angle." "New angle?" Jenna, a black African woman, asked. Brian, a black African man, waited. "How much do you know about me?" Jenna's mind offered the obvious. His name, his kid, the missing babysitter. But the question had weight. Across the room, Vanessa, a black African woman's laughter peaked. Another phone lifted. The salads landed. Sophie, a black African child, poked a cucumber. Brian, a black African man, met Jenna's eyes. "I don't usually do bios on first meetings," Brian, a black African man, said. "But I don't want you blindsided by whatever they try next." "Okay," Jenna, a black African woman, said. "Tell me." Brian, a black African man, exhaled. "There's a part of my life I keep quiet in rooms like this. A beat. If they figure it out, and they might, you'll hear it before I can explain." Jenna, a black African woman, felt the drawstring pull. Cameras, laughter, old betrayals. She folded the drawing and tucked it into her bag. "Whatever it is," she said, "we can handle it at this table." Something in Brian's, a black African man's, face settled. He opened his mouth. And Vanessa, a black African woman, stood waving her phone like a trophy. "Oh my God," she crowed loud for the bar. "You guys, you will not believe who Daddy over there really is." A ripple moved through the room, chairs shifting, forks pausing. People in a bar, all black, African. Brian, a black African man, didn't flinch, but a tiny muscle jumped near his temple, the tell Sophie had mentioned. Brian, a black African man, leaned toward Jenna, a black African woman, voice barely a thread. "Whatever she says, it's not the whole story." Jenna, a black African woman, nodded, throat tight. "Run and let the narrative chase her, or sit here and make the story look her in the eye." She stayed. Jenna, a black African woman, decided to stay. Sometimes intimacy isn't fire. It's the slow warmth of someone daring to stay when the world leans in to mock. The room buzzed with a low ripple after Vanessa's little performance, but nothing more spilled out. Not yet. Maybe she was bluffing, maybe waiting for the perfect time to strike. Brian didn't chase it, didn't demand attention back. He simply sat, steady and grounded, and focused on the 2 people at his table. Jenna found herself studying him in the quiet that followed. His posture wasn't defensive, not even after being ambushed. He adjusted Sophie's sweater, smoothed her curls with a gentleness that made Jenna's throat tighten. The man radiated something she hadn't felt in years. Calm, a safe harbor. Dinner arrived, plates steaming. The waiter slid roasted chicken in front of Jenna, salmon before Brian, and pasta piled high for Sophie. The little girl gasped in delight, twirling noodles with clumsy enthusiasm. "Look, Daddy, it's a crown." She arranged French fries into a jagged circle around her plate. Brian chuckled. "Her Majesty, the pasta queen." Sophie grinned and pointed her fork at Jenna. "She's the Princess of Chicken." The title was ridiculous, but Jenna laughed anyway, a sound that startled her as much as anyone. It wasn't brittle or forced. It was real. For a moment, she forgot the watching eyes, forgot Vanessa's looming cruelty. Brian lifted his glass of water and a small toast. "To the Princess of Chicken," he said softly, his eyes catching hers. Jenna clinked her glass, cheeks warm. "And the pasta queen," she added, bowing her head toward Sophie. The little girl squealed, kicking her flashing shoes under the table. As laughter faded, Brian's expression shifted, gentle but more serious. He cut a piece of salmon, set it on Sophie's plate, and then looked at Jenna. "I don't usually talk about this on, well, whatever kind of night this is, but you should know, my wife passed away 3 years ago. Ovarian cancer. It was fast." Jenna's fork stilled. Grief recognized grief. I'm so sorry, she said, her voice soft. Brian gave a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. Thanks. Sophie was just one. She doesn't remember much, just the stories I tell. He glanced at his daughter, then back at Jenna. I haven't dated since. Honestly, this is my first time trying again. The words weren't fishing for pity. They were just truth, laid gently on the table like an offering. Jenna nodded, the air thick around her. Then we're both new at this, she admitted. She didn't explain more, but something in Brian's gaze told her he sensed there was pain behind her words too. Across the room, Vanessa's group grew restless. Their whispers were sharp, their disappointment obvious. The spectacle was slipping. Jenna wasn't crumbling. She was laughing, connecting, living. The realization sparked something fierce inside Jenna. Maybe this night wasn't just survival. Maybe it could be more. Sophie interrupted her thoughts, shoving the pasta crown toward Jenna. You can wear it, she announced. Brian chuckled. Jenna raised a brow. Think it'll fit? Definitely, Sophie said with all the certainty of a child. And so Jenna, shy accountant, humiliated target, placed a wobbly ring of fries on her head and laughed until her sides hurt. For the first time in a long time, she felt the wall she'd built start to bend. Not breaking, not yet, but softening. She didn't notice Vanessa's cold gaze or the phone angled discreetly again. For now, all she saw was Sophie's joy, Brian's quiet gratitude, and a glimpse of what it might mean to be chosen, not mocked. But tenderness invites danger. Because when Brian's secret finally slips, will Jenna see him as the man across the table or the untouchable CEO Vanessa is itching to expose? Sometimes hope doesn't roar in. It tiptoes on sticky fingers and giggles that remind you what innocence feels like. The air at the table felt lighter after Brian's quiet confession. It wasn't that grief disappeared, it never does. But somehow in naming it, he'd made the moment real. Jenna's pulse had steadied, her fork finally moving again, though she barely tasted the roasted chicken. Her focus kept drifting across the table, to Sophie's crown of fries slipping lopsided, to Brian's patient hands cutting her pasta into bite-sized twirls. Sophie jabbed a fry into her scoop of ice cream when dessert arrived. I'm the ice cream princess, she declared, cheeks sticky with chocolate. My kingdom is gooey. Brian laughed under his breath, shaking his head. Careful, Your Majesty. Kingdoms are expensive to clean. Jenna snorted before she could stop herself, then pressed a napkin to her lips. She hadn't laughed like that, unguarded, ridiculous, in years. Sophie's gaze shifted to Jenna, eyes glimmering with curiosity. What's your kingdom? She asked solemnly. Caught off guard, Jenna blinked. Oh, I don't know, maybe the land of spreadsheets? Brian chuckled. That's terrifying. Endless columns, never-ending totals, a kingdom of balance and boredom. Hey, Jenna protested, smiling despite herself. Balance is important. Without it, the kingdom falls. Sophie clapped, delighted. Then you're the queen of numbers. Daddy can be Sir Napkin. Brian raised a brow. Sir Napkin? Keeper of clean hands, Sophie explained matter-of-factly, holding out her sticky fingers until he wiped them. The three of them laughed together, a sound so natural it startled Jenna. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt included, not tolerated or pitied, but included, woven into a rhythm not her own. Brian's eyes lingered on her a second too long. There was something steady in them, something she hadn't let herself hope for. Respect. She tucked Sophie's earlier drawing deeper into her purse, like a secret talisman. A princess in a crown, her crown. It was messy, childish, but it meant someone had looked at her and seen more than quiet Jenna. Vanessa's table, however, hadn't given up. Phones still hovered, laughter rippled like poison gas waiting for oxygen. But their target wasn't folding. She was laughing, smiling, and that, ironically, was ruining their show. Brian caught Jenna's glance toward the lurking audience. His jaw tightened, just a flicker, then eased. Ignore them, he murmured. They don't get to write this. Jenna wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that a lifetime of scripts written by cruel hands could be rewritten here, at a candle-lit table, by a widowed father and his fearless child. For the first time since stepping off the bus, she felt a spark, not a blaze, but the smallest flicker, that maybe, just maybe, this night wouldn't end in shame. Maybe it could be the beginning of something unexpected. Sophie yawned, curling against her bunny. The fries crown slid sideways, forgotten. Brian gathered her into his arms with ease. careful and practiced. Jenna watched, heart tightening at the tenderness in the small gestures, adjusting her sweater, tucking the bunny close, brushing curls from her forehead. It wasn't just kindness, it was devotion, and it planted something dangerous in Jenna, the seed of wanting more. But seeds need soil, and when the first crack of Brian's secret life begins to show, will Jenna nurture the hope growing inside her, or smother it before it can bloom? Truth rarely announces itself with trumpets. More often, it slips out in half glimpses, daring you to notice. Saturday morning arrived with sunlight spilling through thin curtains and Jenna clutching her phone like it was something alive. Brian's text from the night before still glowed on the screen. There's an art show at Sophie's community center tomorrow. She's been working on something special. She'll be crushed if you're not there. It wasn't just an invitation. It was trust. An opening into the real fabric of his world. Jenna almost said no. The old voice whispered, "You don't belong there. You'll stand out. You'll ruin it." But another voice, fainter but steadier, urged her forward. And so she went. The Maplewood Community Center was nothing like Rosewood Bistro. No crystal glasses, no sharp laughter disguised as sophistication. Instead, paper butterflies dangled from the ceiling, and the air smelled of crayons and cookies. A band of kids plinked off key on plastic instruments, proud as symphony players. Brian met her at the door, Sophie balanced on his hip, tutu puffed out like she was headlining Broadway. "She's been talking about you all week," he said softly. Sophie wriggled until he set her down, then grabbed Jenna's hand with sticky fingers. "Come see, mine's over here." Her painting was simple. 3 figures holding hands under a rainbow. One was Sophie, one was clearly Brian, and the third wore a golden crown over blonde hair. The words scrawled across the top in red paint. "Mommy too." Jenna's throat tightened until it ached. She crouched beside Sophie. "Is that me?" Sophie nodded proudly. "You make Daddy smile. That's what mommies do." Brian's face shifted, eyes shining before he turned slightly, pretending to fix Sophie's strap. His silence said more than words could. The exhibit went on, rows of bright, messy masterpieces, but Jenna kept circling back to that rainbow painting. She felt exposed, raw, as if Sophie had painted a truth Jenna wasn't ready to face. Later, as kids clustered around coloring tables, Brian and Jenna found a quiet corner with paper cups of lukewarm coffee. "This place," Jenna murmured, "it feels safe." "It saved us," Brian admitted. "After everything, it became home for Sophie. For me, too." He didn't elaborate, but Jenna caught the weight in his tone. Safe wasn't something people said lightly. Then it happened. A buzz from his phone, screen flashing as he checked a message. Just for a second, Jenna saw the email header. Morgan Capital, Executive Board. Her breath caught. Morgan Capital wasn't some small-time business. It was the investment firm. Articles about it filled financial pages. Her accounting colleagues gossiped about its billion-dollar moves. Brian noticed her glance, their eyes locked. "You saw it, didn't you?" he said quietly. Jenna hesitated, then nodded. "I try to keep that part of my life quiet." His voice was calm, but there was no shame in it, just weariness. "People treat you differently once they know, and I didn't want you to see that before you saw me." Jenna's mind spun. The man who shared crayons with his daughter, who wiped sticky fingers and joked about Fry's crowns. He wasn't just a widowed dad. He was the Brian Morgan, a founder, a CEO, the kind of man whose name showed up in headlines, whose choices shifted markets. And yet here he was drinking stale coffee with her in a community center buzzing with paper butterflies. Her chest tightened with both awe and dread. Because if he belonged to that world of polished suits and billion-dollar deals, how could she, with her thrift store cardigans and debt-shadowed life, ever belong to him? Will Jenna let this revelation build the fragile bridge between them? Or will it widen the chasm she already fears she can't cross? Hope can sprout in the cracks, but doubt is the storm that threatens to drown it before it grows. That night, Jenna lay awake staring at the ceiling, Sophie's painting propped on her dresser like it was watching her. "Mommy, too." The words glowed louder than neon. Brian Morgan. Not just Brian the dad, Brian the patient listener. Brian the man who defended her at Rosewood. Brian Morgan, the founder of Morgan Capital, The kind of man who sat on boards, signed checks with more zeros than she'd ever see in a lifetime, and funded entire community centers without blinking. And her? She was a junior accountant with a thinning savings account, overdue medical bills for her mother, and a resume that read more survival than success. She couldn't even afford Rosewood Bistro without overdrawing her card. Every sweet moment of the evening replayed in her mind, but now it all looked different under the harsh light of truth. The warm toast over water glasses, Sophie's fries crown, the easy laughter. They suddenly felt fragile, like paper castles too close to a flame. Her phone buzzed. A text from Brian. "Thank you for today. It meant a lot to both of us." She typed a reply, fingers hovering. "I had a wonderful time." Then she deleted it, tried again. Sophie's painting was beautiful. Delete. The words felt dangerous, too open, too hopeful. Finally, she sent a safe, "You're welcome," then set the phone face down. The next morning, Brian sent a photo of Sophie holding a popsicle, grin wide, captioned, "She says hi, Princess of Chicken." Jenna smiled despite herself, but waited hours before replying. "Tell her hi back." It became a pattern, where once she would have answered instantly, now she stalled. When Brian suggested dinner, she claimed her mother needed her. When he invited her to Sunday at the park, she made up a work deadline. Each excuse twisted like barbed wire inside her. But she convinced herself it was better this way. Because how could she step into his world without dragging him down? How could she be mommy too, when she could barely be enough for herself? At the office, Vanessa's whispers grew sharper. Somehow word had spread that Jenna was dating above her station. Snide comments floated in the air. "Fairy tales are for kids. He'll get bored when he sees her real life." Laughter that curdled as soon as Jenna walked in. Her chest felt heavier each day. It wasn't just them. It was her own voice joining the chorus. "You don't belong. You never will." Clara tried. "Jen, you're overthinking. He likes you. Sophie adores you." But Jenna couldn't shake it. She'd been left before, burned by someone she trusted, someone she'd believed in. The higher she let herself climb now, the further she'd fall when the truth caught up. So she built distance, brick by brick, a fortress of late replies, canceled plans, polite smiles. Safer, she told herself. Kinder even. Better to fade now than to let Sophie attach herself to someone bound to disappoint. Her heart disagreed. Every ignored buzz of her phone felt like ripping out another thread of something she'd only just begun to weave. One night, as she slid into bed, the painting caught her eye again. A rainbow. 3 figures holding hands. Sophie's messy letters, spelling mommy too. Jenna turned it face down. But when Vanessa finally finds proof and takes her cruelty public, will Jenna's retreat protect anyone or destroy the fragile hope she's already begun to nurture? The cruelest cuts don't always come from strangers. They come from people who know exactly where you bleed. It started with whispers, office chatter that tightened when Jenna walked past, the way conversations bent around her name like a hook. At first, she ignored it. People always talked, but the snickers grew sharper, the glances more pointed, until even Clara's reassurances couldn't drown them out. Then one Monday morning, Jenna opened her phone and felt her stomach drop. A photo. Grainy but clear enough. Her crouched on the sidewalk, tying Sophie's shoe. Sophie's curls tumbled forward, the stuffed bunny clutched in her arms. Brian stood just out of frame, but the caption made the story sting. Some women will play house with anyone just to feel needed. Cringe. Vanessa. Of course it was Vanessa. The post had her fingerprints all over it. The cutting tone, the faux concern emojis, the crowd of comments piling beneath like jackals. Her chest burned, breath shallow. It wasn't just a joke anymore. It was public, viral within their circles, maybe beyond. Her private tenderness with Sophie twisted into something shameful. By the time she reached the office, the air was poison. Colleagues whispered behind half-raised mugs. A few offered fake sympathy. "Hope you're okay." Their smiles didn't reach their eyes. Clara intercepted her near the copier. "Jen, don't look at your phone. Just don't." Too late, Jenna shoved past, eyes stinging. She wanted to scream, to defend herself, but what could she say? That it wasn't like that? That Brian wasn't a joke, Sophie wasn't a prop, that she wasn't desperate? The more she imagined explaining, the more pathetic it sounded. By lunch, she drafted her resignation letter. Short, blunt, no goodbyes, no explanations. Just, effective immediately. Clara begged her to wait, to fight. But Jenna was already gone. Hard hammering, head bowed as she slipped out of the building for the last time. The city air felt thin, cruel. That night, her apartment closed in around her. She sat in the dark, scrolling the post again and again, like pressing a bruise. Every cruel comment confirmed what she already feared. She didn't belong in Brian's world. Not with him, not with Sophie. Certainly not in a life that could be twisted and mocked so easily. Her phone buzzed. A new message from Brian. Hey, just checking in. Sophie wants to show you her new drawing. She misses you. Jenna stared at the screen, thumbs trembling. She didn't reply. Couldn't. Better to vanish now before the humiliation spread further, before Sophie's trust grew deeper. She dropped the phone onto the couch, turned away, and pulled the paintings Sophie had given her from under a stack of bills. Mommy, too. The words glared like an accusation. Tears blurred her vision, but she forced herself to fold the paper carefully, sliding it into a drawer out of sight, out of reach. Maybe Vanessa was right. Maybe love wasn't for her. Maybe she was only ever meant to be the punchline. But when Clara shows up at her door with fire in her eyes, will Jenna let someone fight for her, or has she already surrendered to the cruelest story? 3 days passed. Jenna lived in silence, blinds drawn, phone buzzing unanswered. She went through motions: cereal for dinner, dishes left in the sink, old novels open but unread. Each time she reached for her phone, she saw that post again in her mind's eye. Sophie's trusting little face, turned into a punchline. Her chest ached with shame so sharp it felt like breathing glass. Then came the knock. Hard, insistent. Not the polite tap of a neighbor, but the pounding of someone who refused to be ignored. Jenna Harper, open this door or I swear I'll kick it down, Clara. Jenna considered pretending she wasn't home. But another round of knocks rattled the frame, followed by Clara's muffled voice. I know you're in there, and I brought food, so unless you want dumplings going cold. Reluctantly, Jenna unlocked the door. Clara swept in, hair wild, takeout bags dangling. She dropped them on the coffee table and planted herself in front of Jenna. You quit your job without telling me. You've been ghosting Brian. What the hell are you doing? Jenna folded her arms, trying to sound steady. I'm protecting them. From me. Clara's eyes narrowed. Try again. Jenna's voice cracked. He's everything I'm not. Powerful, generous, stable. I'm just someone he feels sorry for. And Sophie, if I let her love me, I'll only end up hurting her too. Clara stared, fury and heartbreak wrestling in her face. You think that's what this is? A pity project? Jenna, he doesn't look at you like that. He chose you. And Sophie, God, that little girl lights up like a Christmas tree every time you walk in the room. Jenna shook her head. That's why it's dangerous. She deserves someone permanent, not me. Clara softened, but her words hit like truth hurled straight to the gut. You're not afraid of failing, Jen. You're afraid of being loved for real. No strings, no conditions. That terrifies you. Jenna's lips parted, but no words came. Her eyes stung. She turned away, staring at the folded paintings still tucked half-hidden under the drawer's edge. Clara reached out, touched her shoulder. You survived betrayal, humiliation, loneliness. You don't get to tell me you're too fragile to survive being loved. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. Jenna finally whispered, what if I can't do it? What if I break them? Clara squeezed her arm. Then you try. And if you stumble, you get back up. That's what family is, Jenna. Messy, hard, worth it. For the first time in weeks, something cracked through Jenna's wall. Not laughter, not relief, but raw, aching hope. But when Brian shows up at her door the next evening with Sophie in his arms, will Jenna finally face the love she fears, or push it away for good? Sometimes love doesn't arrive with the fireworks. Sometimes it knocks softly, asking if you'll open the door, even if it's for the last time. Evening fell quiet over Jenna's apartment, the kind of hush that makes every sound sharper. She sat curled on the couch, Clara's words still echoing. You're not afraid of failing. You're afraid of being loved for real. Then came the knock, not loud, not urgent, gentle. 3 taps, a pause, then one more. Her chest tightened. She already knew who it was. When she opened the door, Brian stood there. Sophie nestled against his shoulder, pink bunny dangling from one small hand. He didn't launch into explanations or accusations. He just looked at her, eyes tired but steady, as if he'd been carrying the weight of unsent words. "I didn't come to argue," he said softly. "I just needed to see you one last time, if that's all you'll let me have." The breath caught in Jenna's throat. She wanted to say no, not last time, not ever, but the words stuck. Sophie squirmed down from his arms and stepped forward, holding out a folded piece of paper with both hands. "This is for you," she said with the gravity only children carry. Jenna took it carefully, fingers trembling. She unfolded the crayon drawing, and the tears came instantly. 3 figures again, Sophie in the middle, Brian on one side, Jenna on the other, all holding hands beneath a rainbow arched awkwardly but boldly across the page. Above them, blocky red letters spelled, "Our Family." Jenna pressed a hand to her mouth, the paper shaking in her grip. Sophie's voice was small, uncertain. "You're in it, with us." Brian crouched beside his daughter, his gaze fixed on Jenna. "She drew that without me knowing. But I can't say she's wrong. You've already been part of us, more than you realize." Jenna's chest ached, torn between longing and fear. "Brian, He held up a hand, quiet but firm. "You don't have to explain. If you're not ready, if this is too much, I'll step back. But know this, Jenna, you never were a pity project. You've been the first person in a long time who saw me as more than my job, my money, my loss." Sophie tugged Jenna's sleeve. "Daddy smiles more when you're here." The words undid her completely. She sank to her knees, arms wrapping around Sophie, the child's warmth pressing against her like an anchor. Tears soaked into curls and bunny fur. Brian's hand rested lightly on Jenna's back. No pressure, just presence. She wanted to stay in that circle forever, but fear still whispered, if you let this in, you could lose it. Again. When she finally looked up, Brian's eyes were waiting, open and steady. No demands, just a question left unspoken. Will you let yourself be loved? Jenna's answer caught in her throat, too tangled to form. So she stayed silent, holding Sophie like she was both the problem and the cure. Brian exhaled slowly, nodded once and rose. "We'll go. Thank you for letting us come by." He lifted Sophie gently, though the little girl reached back for Jenna. "It's okay, sweetheart," he whispered. "We'll see her again." The door closed softly behind them, leaving Jenna on the floor, clutching the drawing like a lifeline, unsure if she'd just lost her only chance or been given one last opening. Tomorrow, at the Women Who Rise conference, Jenna will face not just Brian but herself. Will she find the courage to step back into the light or retreat for good? Sometimes you don't choose the stage. Sometimes life drags you into the spotlight to see if you'll finally claim your voice. Jenna hadn't planned to attend. The very thought of a crowded ballroom filled with polished women in tailored blazers and bold lipstick made her stomach churn. But Clara was relentless. "You need to be reminded of who you are," she'd insisted, thrusting a ticket into Jenna's hand. "And maybe of what you still deserve." So here she was, sitting in the back row of the grand hall, her cardigan wrapped tight, the program clutched like a shield. The chandeliers glittered overhead, the air alive with perfume and quiet power. Around her, women leaned in close, sharing stories of business launched, foundations built, lives rebuilt. The conference was called Women Who Rise, and as the morning unfolded, the name proved more than a slogan. Each speaker walked on stage carrying scars visible or invisible, addiction overcome, careers rebuilt after betrayal, losses survived and turned into fuel. Jenna listened, but her mind drifted. Every story felt both too big and too close. She wasn't a founder or a survivor of headlines. She was just tired. An accountant with no savings, a sick mother, and a heart that flinched at the memory of one viral post. Yet as the hours passed, something inside her stirred. A woman spoke of clawing her way back from bankruptcy, another of healing after an abusive marriage. Their voices shook, but their hands never wavered. Each story was a mirror, tilted differently, reflecting pain Jenna understood. At lunch, Clara nudged her. "See, you belong here." Jenna shook her head. "I don't. They're warriors. I'm just surviving." Clara's gaze sharpened. "Survival is a kind of war, Jen. You've been fighting alone for years. Maybe it's time you stop calling that weakness. The words lodged in Jenna's chest. By afternoon, her nerves frayed. She thought about slipping out, disappearing before the crowd grew restless. But then the MC's voice boomed across the hall. Ladies, we are honored to close with a man whose quiet contributions have transformed lives across this city. Please welcome Mr. Brian Morgan. Jenna's blood turned to ice. The name cracked through the hall like thunder. Applause erupted, thunderous, as Brian stepped onto the stage in a navy suit. The suit fit like it was stitched with authority itself. Calm, confident, yet carrying the same warmth she knew from quiet dinners and pasta crowns. Her heart pounded. She wanted to vanish under her chair, but his eyes scanned the crowd and found her. For just a second, his gaze held hers. A pause. Then the faintest smile tugged at his lips. Good afternoon, Brian began, his voice steady. This conference isn't about me. It's about you, the women who keep moving forward when the world tells you to stop. Jenna's chest ached. He spoke not like a CEO commanding a boardroom, but like a man offering gratitude. He spoke of Sophie, of losing his wife, of building Hope Sparks Foundation not as charity, but as survival. And then, without warning, he closed his folder of notes and stepped away from the podium. The ballroom hushed. Brian walked off the stage, down the center aisle, his eyes never leaving Jenna. Each step seemed impossibly loud in the silence. Every woman turned to follow his path, hundreds of eyes locking on the shy figure in the back row. Jenna's pulse hammered. Her instincts screamed, hide, run, don't let them watch you break. But it was too late. Brian stopped in front of her, the weight of the entire room pressing down. And then, in one fluid motion, he dropped to one knee. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. In his hand, a small velvet box. Inside, not a diamond meant to dazzle, but a simple, elegant gold band. Understated, honest. Brian's voice was low, steady, carrying more weight than the chandeliers above. Jenna, he said, the night they tried to make a joke of my daughter, you sat down anyway. You turned their cruelty into the kindest moment of my life. And since then, every day has only proven what I already knew, that you are my second chance. Jenna's eyes filled, the world blurring into a storm of light and sound. Will she find the courage to say yes in front of everyone? Or let fear steal away the love standing at her feet? Every love story has a turning point. The moment you either run from the fire or step into it and let it burn away the fear. The ballroom holds its breath. A girl in a cardigan sits in the back row trying to disappear. Brian kneels there, velvet box open, gaze steady like a lighthouse. He isn't performing. He's inviting. Jenna, he says, voice low but caring, would you be the first person to call me husband again since the day I lost everything? The air leaves her. Memories surge. Matt's note on the fridge, the emptied account. Vanessa's laugh, the photo that turned tenderness into a spectacle. Shame is muscle memory. Sit down, shrink, say no before he sees who you really are. Another picture pushes through. A purple crayon, a Fry's crown, a little girl who believed first. You can fight dragons too. Her hand flies to her mouth. For once, the tears aren't a leak. They're a floodgate. Her ribs feel like a birdcage finally unlatched. Silence deepens. Someone muffles a gasp. A stranger whispers, say yes. Jenna rises on shaky legs. Words fail, so she uses what she has. She nods. Once, twice, a third time. The room erupts. Not polite claps, thunder. Women cheer. Clara, 2 sections over, throws both hands up like she's been waiting years for this exact yes. Brian exhales a laugh that's half relief, half prayer. He stands, slips the ring on her finger, simple gold, warm as skin. No glitter, no apology, just a circle that says, I choose you and I will keep choosing. He folds her in. Jenna memorizes the details, the press of his suit, the cadence of his breathing, the faint shake in his shoulders he tries to hide. He didn't come to rescue her so much as to stand beside her while she rescued herself. Then a pink comet, Sophie flying down the aisle, tutu flaring, bunny flapping. She barrels into them with the velocity of joy. Does this mean, she pants, I have a mommy now? Jenna drops to her knees. The world narrows to freckles and chocolate on Sophie's chin. Yes, sweetheart, she whispers, cracked but sure. You do. 100 women lose it. tissues everywhere. Someone starts a soft chant, family, family. Brian crouches, one hand on Sophie's back, the other on Jenna's shoulder, and for a breath they are a small circle in a roaring sea. No cameras matter, no caption can hold it. The three of them just breathe together. Jenna hadn't wanted the stage. She didn't want spectacle. But this is different. A crowd blessing what cruel people tried to curse. Witnesses saying, "We saw you stand in the place you were meant to be broken." She wipes her face, laughing a laugh that tastes like relief. "I'm underdressed," she sniffs. Brian grins. "You're perfect." Then softer, "Thank you for staying that first night." "I almost ran," she admits. "I know," he says. "I almost did too." Sophie wedges between them, impatient. "Can we get pancakes for celebration?" The room laughs again. "Ladies, shall we give this family a proper send-off?" the MC calls. Music swells and applause follows them as they head for the side doors. At the threshold, Jenna glances back. The crowd is still on its feet. She has the odd sense the universe just stamped her passport out of the country of not enough. But doors are thresholds for a reason. On the other side lie logistics and headlines, boardrooms and schedules, sick days and school pickups, grief that still hums in a back room of the heart. A proposal is a spark. A life is the work of keeping it fed. Jenna thumbs the ring. The gold hums against her skin like a quiet yes. She looks at Brian, the man, not the CEO, and at Sophie, already planning a pancake kingdom. And she makes a second decision, not just to love, but to learn how. Joy is easy on a stage. Tomorrow brings the real tests. When Jenna steps fully into Brian's world, will the same people who cheered accept her seat at his table? Or try to pull the chair away again? Happily Ever After doesn't begin with fairy dust. It begins with cardboard boxes, messy mornings, and the stubborn act of choosing each other every day. The house on Maple Lane wasn't a mansion, though it could have been. With Brian's resources, he could have bought sprawling estates with gates that whispered untouchable. But instead, he chose a warm, sunlit house with wide windows and creaky stairs. The kind of place where laughter could echo and crayons could scatter across the floor without anyone caring. 2 weeks after the proposal, Jenna arrived with boxes stacked higher than her confidence. A lifetime of modest possessions, thrifted furniture, worn paperbacks, and sweaters stretched at the sleeves, felt small against the weight of what she was stepping into. She stood at the threshold, clutching Sophie's rainbow painting like a passport into unfamiliar territory. Brian met her at the door, sleeves rolled up, smile unguarded. "Welcome home." The words nearly undid her. Home. Not his home. Theirs. Sophie barreled down the stairs in pajamas decorated with tiny stars. "Mommy's here," she squealed, bunny dangling from her fist. She tugged, Jenna inside immediately assigning her the sacred job of lunchbox packer. "Daddy always forgets the note," Sophie explained seriously. "You have to draw something, like a heart or a dragon." So Jenna did. A pink heart on a sticky note slipped into a sandwich bag. Shaky lines, but steady love. And when Sophie found it at school the next day, she held it up like treasure, announcing to her classmates, "See, my mommy loves me." Nights were different, too. After Sophie's bedtime story, sometimes dinosaurs and tiaras, sometimes princesses with swords, Jenna would collapse into Brian's arms. Astonished that peace could be this simple. No games, no second-guessing. Just the steady rhythm of someone who saw her, not as a joke, not as a wound, but as a woman worth staying for. Yet it wasn't just about comfort. Brian challenged her gently, nudging her into spaces she'd never imagined. One morning, he slid a folder across the breakfast table. "The community center needs a new program director for their kids' art initiative," he said. "You're perfect for it." Jenna blinked. "Me? I'm not—" "You are," he interrupted softly. "You have the heart for it. You already changed Sophie's world. Why not let that ripple out?" It terrified her, the idea of stepping into leadership, of failing not just herself but dozens of children. But when she visited the center again, saw the kids painting with weed, unfiltered joy, she felt something spark. For the first time, she could picture a future where she wasn't just surviving, but building. Still, whispers lingered. Vanessa's shadow stretched farther than Jenna wanted to admit. Rumors of gold digging trickled through the edges of Brian's world. At the grocery store, she caught two women staring, whispering behind manicured hands. The old fear tightened her chest. They'll never let me belong. But then Sophie's hand found hers, small and sure. Don't listen, she said simply. You're my mommy. That's real. And Brian, catching her eye across the checkout line, added with quiet conviction, ours is the only truth that matters. For the first time, Jenna believed him. But just as she begins to settle into this fragile new happiness, a fresh storm brews. Vanessa isn't done. And this time, her strike won't just aim at Jenna's dignity, but at the very foundation of the family she's building. Some people can't stand to see you happy. They'll burn the whole stage down just to make sure you never get to take a bow. Life on Maple Lane was slowly stitching itself together. Jenna woke to the sound of Sophie's feet pounding down the hallway. Mornings spent brewing coffee while Brian scanned headlines. Evenings filled with crayons, giggles, and the quiet miracle of belonging. But storms have a way of brewing just when the skies look clearest. Vanessa wasn't done. After the conference, the office had buzzed for days. Whispers of, "Did you see that proposal?" mixed with bitterness from those who secretly envied Jenna. For Vanessa, though, it wasn't gossip, it was humiliation. The prank she had orchestrated had turned into the most public display of empowerment she'd ever witnessed. And Jenna, quiet Jenna, had walked away with everything Vanessa wanted but couldn't buy: love, respect, and a family. So she sharpened her knives. One morning, Jenna arrived at the community center early to prep art supplies for the kids. The walls were already alive with paintings, dinosaurs in crowns, stick figures under rainbows, a whole galaxy splattered in glitter glue. She felt proud, hers, all of it. Her phone buzzed. Clara, the text was short. Vanessa posted again, "Don't panic, just call me." Jenna's stomach dropped. Against her better judgment, she opened the link. There it was, a photo of her entering the Maple Lane house, arms full of boxes. The caption read, "From blind date to moving in with a boss, some girls really know how to speedrun life. Add gold digger goals." The comments came fast. Wow, that escalated. Single dad CEO? Jackpot? Kid gets a babysitter, she gets the bank account. Cute. Jenna's hands shook. Her cheeks burned as if the entire internet were laughing outside the center's doors. Brian found her minutes later, crouched on the supply closet floor, phone clutched to her chest. "Jen, what happened?" She shoved the screen at him, unable to speak. His jaw tightened, eyes darkening as he read. For a moment, she expected anger, outrage. Instead, he set the phone down and took her trembling hands. "Listen to me. This is noise. It's cruel, but it's not truth. Don't let her write your story." "But everyone will see it," Jenna whispered. "They'll believe it. They'll say They can say what they want," Brian cut in, firm but calm. "I know who you are. Sophie knows. That's our reality, not theirs." Before she could reply, Sophie burst in, glitter all over her hands. "Mommy, look, I made you a crown." She held up a paper tiara covered in sequins, eyes wide with pride. Jenna's heart broke and healed all at once. Vanessa's poison was real, but so was this messy, glitter-stained love that no caption could twist. Still, the storm wasn't done. Later that week, an anonymous email landed in Brian's corporate inbox, packed with screenshots, rumors, and ugly insinuations about Jenna's past, her finances, even her mother's illness. A direct strike, not just at her dignity, but at Brian's position as CEO. Vanessa wasn't just playing for cruelty anymore. She was playing for destruction. Will Brian risk his reputation to shield Jenna? Or will the pressure force her to walk away again, this time for good? Every story has a fracture point, the place where you either shatter for good or fuse the broken edges into something stronger. The email hit like a grenade. Brian read it once, jaw locked, then a second time, slower, every line slicing deeper. Anonymous sender, but the tone dripped with familiarity. Screenshots of Jenna's resignation email, photos of her walking into his house, even bank statements hacked or stolen that showed her dwindling savings. The subject line was venom in plain font. "Is this who you want as the face beside you?" Brian closed his laptop before Sophie could wander into the room. He pinched the bridge of his nose, fighting the urge to slam his fist into the desk. It wasn't just gossip anymore. It was an attack engineered to make him question the woman who had just said yes to forever. When he told Jenna, she broke. She stood in their kitchen, clutching a dish towel like it might anchor her, tears streaking down her cheeks. "It's all true," she whispered. "I am broke. I did quit my job in shame. My mom is sick. They'll spin it into a story that I clawed my way into your life because I had nothing else." Brian stepped closer, but she retreated, shaking her head. "You'll lose everything, Brian. Your board, your investors. They won't see me as anything but a risk." His voice was steady, though inside he burned. "I don't care what they see." "Well, I do," Jenna cried, "because I've been the punchline before, and I can't drag Sophie into that fire. She deserves better than whispers about her mom being a fraud." Silence swallowed the room. Sophie's drawings lined the fridge, princesses, dinosaurs, rainbows, and Jenna felt like each one accused her of failing already. She pressed the towel to her mouth, muffling a sob. "Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe Vanessa was right. Maybe I don't belong in your world." Brian closed the distance in 2 strides, gripping her shoulders, firm but gentle. "Jenna, look at me." She resisted, eyes down. His voice hardened, the CEO edge slipping through. "Look at me." Her eyes lifted, wet and shattered. "You belong here because you chose to sit down that night when everyone wanted you to run, because you stayed when it hurt, because Sophie trusts you. I don't care about boardrooms or whispers. I care about this." He tapped her chest over her heart. "And this?" He touched her hand where the simple gold band glinted. Jenna trembled. "But what if I'm not strong enough?" "Then I'll hold you up," Brian said. "And when I'm not strong enough, you'll hold me. That's what family is." Her sob cracked into a laugh, weak but real. The first fragile stitch back together. But the storm wasn't done. Later that week, Brian received notice. The board had called an emergency meeting. Rumors about his reckless personal life were spreading fast. His leadership, his reputation, was on trial. And Jenna knew with icy clarity that she would be dragged into that room whether she wanted to or not. At the boardroom table, when powerful men and women demand answers, will Jenna stand beside Brian or sacrifice herself to protect him and Sophie? Every love is tested in fire. Some flames consume, but some forge. The boardroom at Morgan Capital wasn't built for tenderness. Long mahogany table, walls of glass overlooking the skyline, leather chairs filled with people who measured lives in percentages and profit margins. Brian had walked into this room 1,000 times, but never like this. Never with whispers nipping at his heels. Never with the woman he loved cast as a liability. Jenna almost didn't come. She'd argued all morning. "This is your career, Brian. Let me take the fall. I'll disappear, and the rumors will die." But he'd shaken his head, jaw set. "If you walk away now, Vanessa wins. And worse, Sophie loses. We stand together. Always." So here she was, fingers laced with his under the table, her pulse loud in her ears. The meeting began with formalities, but the elephant sat heavy in the room. At last, one board member, a woman with silver hair sharp as steel, leaned forward. "Brian, questions have arisen about your personal choices, about the woman you've chosen to align yourself with." Her gaze flicked to Jenna, clinical, dissecting. "These matters affect reputation, credibility. Investors don't like uncertainty." Jenna wanted to shrink, to vanish. But Brian's thumb brushed her hand, steady. He rose, buttoning his jacket, voice calm but edged with authority. "You're right," he said. "Investors don't like uncertainty. So let me be clear. The woman beside me is not a liability. She is the reason I still stand here at all." Murmurs rippled. He pressed on. 3 years ago, I buried my wife. I lost myself. I built this company bigger than ever, but inside I was hollow. And then, on a night meant to humiliate us both, Jenna Harper sat down at a table she could have run from. She chose kindness when cruelty was easier. She chose to see me, not the CEO, not the money, just a man trying to raise his daughter. He glanced at Jenna, eyes softening, then faced the board again. "If you think that makes me weaker, you don't understand leadership. You don't understand resilience. And maybe you don't understand me." Silence. Heavy. Electric. Then Jenna did the unthinkable. She stood. Her knees trembled, but her voice, though quiet, carried. "I know what they say about me," she began. that I don't belong, that I'm here for what Brian has, and maybe on paper I don't measure up. I'm not rich. I've made mistakes. I've been humiliated, laughed at, left behind. Her eyes burned, but she pressed on. But none of that matters when Sophie runs to me with her drawings, or when Brian lets himself smile again after years of grief. What matters is that we make each other stronger. Isn't that what this company was built on? Believing in second chances? The silver-haired woman studied her. Others shifted, whispering. Finally, another board member, one who had known Brian since the early days, cleared his throat. I'd rather follow a man who fights for what matters than one who hides behind numbers. If this is the kind of partnership he chooses, then I support it. One by one, voices joined, cautious at first, then steady. Not unanimous, never unanimous, but enough. The motion to challenge Brian's leadership died on the table. When the meeting adjourned, Brian exhaled, shoulders easing. He turned to Jenna, pride etched deep. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, she said, tears slipping free. Because I'm done letting other people write my story. In that moment, under the cold glow of boardroom lights, something shifted. Not just survival, not just romance. A family forged in fire, standing taller because of it. Later at Maple Lane, Sophie barreled into their arms, bunny in tow. Did you win? She asked wide-eyed. Brian laughed, scooping her up. We didn't just win, sweetheart. We started. And Jenna, slipping the folded rainbow drawing back onto the fridge, finally believed it. Because sometimes the cruelest jokes become the most beautiful beginnings. And sometimes, against all odds, love rewrites the ending.